Forgiveness is the name of love practiced among people who love poorly. The hard truth is that all people love poorly. We need to forgive and be forgiven every day, every hour, increasingly. That is the great work of love among the fellowship of the weak, that is the human family. Henry Nouwen.
Bending Not Breaking, Season 3, Episode 12, The Western Air Temple. And welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I'm Sunshine Mayfield.
This is Ben Pruitt.
And we've got Max over there on the side with all the dials and the things, making us sound all great.
He's
and
producing.
Also, guess what, Ben?
What?
Ben.
What?
Ben.
What?
We have a special guest tonight.
I love guests.
Today, as we are here, the wonderful host of another Avatar podcast,
Beyond
Bending, which is fantastic. You have to go over and listen to that as well. If you love Avatar, you can listen to more than one podcast. We hope you do. You need to go over to Beyond Bending and listen to Marilyn Chanthala. Welcome, Marilyn!
Woo! I'm so happy to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. And what an episode to be joining us on. You've got the Avatar knowledge. You are a massive fan of the show. You've had interviews with some of the cast before. This is so you've got this down. You're a pro at Avatar.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to tackle this episode. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, the content, let's be real. There's so much content on this episode. It's such a big piece of content that I'm really excited to dive in with you. Especially through a lens of forgiveness. We're talking about forgiveness today, which is really cool.
It's not heavy at all. It is not. It is.
I almost spit out all of what I was drinking.
Yeah, it's I only cried 3 times this episode.
Yeah.
Right? So, but yeah. So let's talk a little bit about forgiveness. Marilyn, when you think of forgiveness, what is when you were kind of watching this episode through that lens, what were you really looking through? What is forgiveness to you?
I think for me, my favorite character is Katara, and so when just a little disclosure, I'm still on season 1 on my podcast, and so so I know the whole story arc of Zuko, but right now my mindset is still on season 1 Zuko. So every anger and frustration and resentment that all of these characters have, I still feel. And so and I try not to when I listen to other Avatar podcasts, I try not to listen past the episode I'm on. But I made an exception for your podcast, so I listened to your interview / episode with Cricket Lee, and oh my gosh, there's so much I want to expand upon from that episode you did with her, because it very much ties in, especially with Zuko's story, all of that Ember Island episode ties in here, and I'm so excited to talk about it.
And I think it's so important to when we're thinking about forgiveness, you kind of said especially when you see Zuko the way we see him in season 1, it is really tough for us to give him the benefit of the doubt based off of all these actions.
Yeah.
Which can be something we have to do when it comes to forgiveness. I feel that so much. I feel that so much because it's hard. And then it's also we can dive more into the way that we feel about Katara, because I think it's really important that you bring
it'll
her
come up.
Ben, what else came up for you with forgiveness?
So I think forgiveness for me, there's so much forgiveness is really problematic. Let's put that there, because, and what I mean by that is there's so much question around why can't you just forgive? And it's forgiveness is divine, and there's so many phrases around forgiveness that where
forgive and forget.
There's so much cliche around forgiveness that sometimes forgiveness itself can get muddled.
Forgiveness, can you imagine? Right?
Yeah, totally. But forgiveness is, not forgiving there's a quote out there somewhere. I think it might have been Nelson Mandela, but like it's that when you don't forgive someone, it's like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really interesting because we are predisposed to forgive people that align with our worldview, or when something goes right, we are more prone to forgive someone. And it's infinitely harder to forgive someone that would change our worldview. And I think that's what we see the gang grappling with in this episode, is that we see their worldview changing. We have seen them dehumanizing and villainizing Zuko up until this point, and Zuko is coming up to this saying, hey, I'm human and I've changed. And it's really hard to reconcile with that change without having seen proof first. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a big thing that happened for me regarding just forgiveness in general in this episode. What about you? What comes up for you when you think of forgiveness?
It's an intentional process, right? Like, you have to be intentional about if you at once were victimized, to go through the change in feelings and attitude about the person who did that to you or the thing. You have to be really intentional about it, and there's a lot of factors that play into this, maybe more so than any lens that we've ever looked into before. Is that it isn't this thing that happens. It isn't just this moment. There are so many other things and so much other work that has to go into whether or not you can forgive someone, and when you forgive someone, and what that looks like. And we see that this episode a lot. So
yeah,
it is my turn, I think.
Oh, the recap.
For a 30-second recap.
Yeah, please enlighten us. What happens during this episode?
Who's got the timer? Who's doing this?
Me. I do. You have 30 seconds on the clock, starting in 3, 2, 1, go.
The gang walks to the Western Air Temple while being sad about reflecting on the adults that they left behind. And then the Toph says she can feel the temple. They're like, where's the temple? And it's under them. Cut to Zuko rappelling down, and it gets flashbacks of Iroh. And then he quicks back to Iroh in the flashback, and it's really sad. And he's really feeling all these things. And he tries to join the gang, and then they don't let him join the gang. And then he actually hurts someone in the gang, and then that's really sad. But then Sparky Boom Man comes along, and then Zuko helps save the day. And then they finally accept him into the group. But it's really, really tough, and a lot of stuff happens, and they have to really deal with all of those things and navigating all those feelings.
Wow.
My favorite line in there was, and a lot of stuff happens.
A lot of stuff happens.
That's a great
emotionally.
Way. That's a great line to use in any recap, folks.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff happens.
It's a great line.
I've only got 5 seconds left. A lot of stuff happens, and
Marilyn,
so we're going to skip all of it.
Marilyn, how did he do? What was that recap like?
I am very impressed. Oh my gosh. My recaps on my episodes are like, okay, so someone left me a review on iTunes that was like, your recaps are too long. And when I read that, I was like, oh, I'm sorry. All right, let me change my ways. But you guys, oh my gosh. Like, Sunshine, good job.
I tried to bring it.
Sunshine, you nailed it.
I did it. No, but let's jump right back into it.
I love your honesty with that too. That's really beautiful.
Well,
that's kind of vulnerable, and I appreciate you sharing that.
I don't look at reviews the same way. When we get reviews, I'm like, what? What do they know?
Yeah.
No. So that's awesome. So Marilyn, just kind of jump in. What was a big moment that you saw forgiveness in this episode?
Whew. Oh man. That's such a. Oh, you're asking me this question. I have to go scene by scene. There's just so much. I remember when you texted me and asked me what kind of lens I wanted to look through, and you gave me like a couple of options. And as I was watching the episode, I think one of my lens that I saw throughout the whole episode was like the concept of home. And so I kind of want to like interweave that into forgiveness, because like this episode is unique, I think, because we're almost at the end and we know these characters so well and where they came from, and just analyzing the show circularly as opposed to linearly without mentioning like what happens after this episode. And so for your question, wait, what was your question?
Just where was that moment of forgiveness that first kind of sparked for you in this episode?
Ooh, the moment of forgiveness. I was still thinking about Katara's forgiveness and how it's not yet. Like we don't see that forgiveness yet, and I think it's interesting to see like all of these characters and how each character has a different way of forgiving, and we'll talk about it later. But also like Zuko forgiving himself and learning from
Oh, that's
that,
beautiful.
and
Yeah, I
and
was gonna. So I want to pause you because I'm like, oh my god, there's so many things that you're lifting up that I want to break down and unpack. So you first mentioned this idea of Katara having not forgiven yet, and so like this is the last line of this episode, right, where Katara essentially sets this boundary, saying, if you put one toe out of line, I will end you.
She's not a howler, Ben. That's
But like, that was a good reference. Well done.
Right.
Like, anyway, like if you do anything wrong, I will end you. And it's just saying that she's not willing to put up with any sort of betrayal again from Zuko. And it's really interesting that like that's her response compared to everybody else. And to be fair, she's been hurt deeply by Zuko personally, right? And I think my question for you, Marilyn, is do you think that she is justified in responding to Zuko this way? What are your thoughts on that?
whew, I'm glad you asked because I made a whole list. Oh my gosh, let me pull this out.
That's awesome. I love this.
And
preparation. We love it.
oh my gosh, when I was rewatching the episode, I was taking notes like a madman. You know that meme of like Charlie from what is it? Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he's like going crazy.
Oh, yeah.
That was like me taking notes. So
I love it.
what I love about how the show dropped on Netflix was like the resurgence of old fans and like us kind of like falling in love with the show again. And also a new generation falling in love with the show for the first time. But the difference with us is that since we're veterans, we understand Katara. Whereas I feel like this new generation that's watching it for the first time is mad at Katara, especially in this episode where she's not as forgiving, right? And there's like a whole, I don't know, there's just like a lot of hate for Katara right now, and I just want to defend her.
That's such an interesting thing to lift up. I think that's fascinating that's what you're seeing, because for me, I think I see a little bit of a mix, not just between old generation, new generation, but like in a lot of people who criticize Katara and her reaction to this moment, and like she should have forgiven Zuko sooner. And there's a lot of like that, but there's also a lot of people who are like, she never needed to forgive Zuko. That's not her responsibility. That is really interesting, right? Sunshine, what's your perspective on this moment?
I stand Katara.
Yes.
I don't necessarily stand the behavior, but
Same.
but he has not done anything to create a safe space for her. So when you were talking about forgiveness requires safety, and at this point, he has not done the work needed to be a credible person when saying, I'm a safe person to be around, because she has seen time and time again that he hasn't been.
Exactly.
And so I want her to forgive him because we know he's good, but she doesn't yet. She really doesn't. And so I want her to forgive him, and I also get why she hasn't.
I'm going to get on a soapbox for a second.
Pull it out.
So there's a podcast by Nadia Bolz-Weber who just interviewed Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg. And Danya Ruttenberg is a pretty famous rabbi in that she has several books out, Newsweek's top 10 rabbis to watch, etc. But one of the things that is interesting is that podcast episode talks about the 5 steps for repentance. And I think it's really interesting to think about how Zuko has gone through these motions. And so she outlines 5 things, and I want to point them out for everybody. First step is confession. And that's not just like confessing to yourself or confessing to God, if you will, but confession, like articulating clearly what harm has been caused and ideally confessing that publicly, at least as public as the harm itself was. So,
Which Zuko tries to do. But when you say clearly, his communication skills
have something left to be desired.
Correct.
Right?
He needs
but
a little bit of practice. But he tried. He tried. That's a moment I cried. He tries.
He's like, hey, Zuko here. But so
frog.
step one. Yeah, that's such a beautiful moment.
Because
like that practice.
He just wants to belong, and at this point, he's still like trying to forgive himself, and it is such a beautiful moment of like, how often are we Are we that person who just wants to belong into a moment, into a space, and he wants it so bad, and he's willing to practice it so he can better his chances of doing that, and it is so heart-wrenching.
It is. It's heart-wrenching because it's real, right? And so that's step one is confession, and we see that, and we see him try that. The next thing is like beginning transfer, and I think confession is also like in the prior episode where he's confessing to Ozai and saying, "Hey, this is the deal. Like, I'm owning this in more places than just the people who I've hurt. I'm owning this in front of my oppressor as well." And so that confession is really important. And so the second step is the beginning of transformation, right? And so getting himself out of a toxic space, which he left the Fire Nation. He said no to Ozai. He says this is no longer something that I can deal with, right? It's like changing your name, cutting your hair, educating yourself, going to therapy. To put it in modern terms, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about, right? And so we see that another thing, that beginning of the transformation when Zuko cuts his top knot off in season 1, right? And so that's just the beginning of that transformation. We have seen that gradually happen over the course of the series. Amends. So amends is when if I step on your foot and you have a medical bill, it's me paying for your medical bill, but not just the medical bill, it's also paying for the harm that I have caused you and the sadness and the things that I put you out of. So it's more than just the actual bill. It's the reconciliation of enough to make it right, to account for enough. And that's the decision on whether and what is enough is the victim's. And that's really important to underscore. The victim is the one who is able to kind of dictate what is enough in terms of how and what those amends look like.
And do we get any of that in this episode? Is there a moment that you see in this episode of that?
I think we do, right? And I think what happens, and I think that's with Combustion Man, right? We see
the start of it.
We see this, yes.
Okay.
We see, he's been doing this over the course of several episodes where he's like saying, okay, I'm going to start talking to May. I'm going to start writing these notes. I'm leaving. I'm going to start making amends here. I'm leaving Ozai. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to say no to Azula. And then, he's starting to now say, hey, we did this, right? And so for apology, he comes in, he apologizes. Victim-centered, again, it's not apologizing to shut the victim up. It's apologizing to actually do something. And it's important that it comes after the amends, right? Because right now what we saw is Zuko apologize at the beginning episode before he was able to demonstrate by fighting Combustion Man. And I think that's what's really beautiful is that after he fights Combustion Man.
Well, that's not his name.
Sparky, Sparky, Boom, Boom Man. Whatever you want to call him.
No.
We'll talk to you, Marilyn, and ask you what your favorite name from him is. But the last thing is, if you have the opportunity to betray again, like Zuko, you don't. And he doesn't, right? And so we see him go through these steps of reconciliation, which I think this is what allows Aang to forgive him, which leads to Toph and Sokka forgiving him. And eventually, when we, spoiler alert, next episode, like when he goes on an adventure with Katara, we see him make amends further with Katara. And I think all of those things lead to that eventual forgiveness. So having heard all of that, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. That was long. I apologize.
Yeah, share the mic, Ben.
Marilyn, is there anything that you heard in that sparked anything in you? What came up as you heard that? Do you disagree with what I said? Do you agree with what I said? What came up?
No, yeah, I definitely agree with what you said. And oh man, this is what's great about Zuko's story is that, we are finally, and Zuko's finally seeing the person that Uncle Iroh has always seen in him. The potential...
Oh, that's so beautiful. Oh, I love that.
The potential to be a great king, and, him trying to atone and to make up for all of the damage that he's done, his forefathers have done, his country's done. Like, he has a lot to do. The country has a lot to do, the Fire Nation. And I think what I want to do in this episode, because you guys are in season 3, and some things might not be as fresh as all of like the listeners, and then maybe you two, just like all of the hurt and everything these characters have gone through throughout the show that the Fire Nation has done to them. Like going back to Katara, like Katara doesn't owe Zuko anything. Like Zuko,
Agreed.
yeah, like Zuko cannot even come close to understanding the generational trauma that Katara and Aang are going through, that all of these nations are going through. And like, and it's little steps, right? We see the little steps Zuko is making in this episode with like the people that he personally knows. And like what we see later is him trying to expand that to his people, and like mirroring like the Holocaust in Germany. Like, people are still recovering from that. It's gonna take generations to undo all of this. And so like
It's interesting that you lift up the Holocaust, because like that's one of the things that I think that Germany has done really well compared to the United States when it comes to like slavery, for instance.
Yeah.
Like if you talk to people in Germany about the Holocaust, there are so many museums, there are so many things that are in place. Like they look at us and our Confederate statues and just cannot fathom why they exist, because of the way that the Holocaust and the way that that experience occurred in Germany. And it's just really fascinating to think about how Germany has grappled with this concept of forgiveness and reconciliation compared to the United States.
And I think you kind of touched onto it too, Marilyn, of how Zuko starts with these personal, trying to make amends on these personal levels. But then we see him start to try to make structural changes throughout the rest of the season as he's working to do that, which, as you're looking for forgiveness, I think you do things because it's the right thing to do, not because you are expecting that. I don't think I ever feel this moment of Zuko be like, I expect Katara to forgive me for all of these things. I think it seems like he's consistently rumbling with that. But even specifically in this episode, I think like you see him get frustrated.
Why am I so bad at being good?
And he's like, I'm just trying to help, but I don't think he never faults them for not trusting him. I think it's this, he understands.
Yeah, that's so big.
He understands why they feel that way. And he understands that his nation has hurt them. And I think that's an important part too, is that he's not expecting. He knows that this is going to be tough. That's why he's practicing. That's why he's trying to do what he can. And I think that when Katara comes in at the end, I think he kind of is like, "Yep,
you're right.
You're right."
I get it.
Like that's what I feel.
Yeah.
And so, absolutely. Are there other characters and moments that you kind of see that forgiveness or lack of forgiveness in at different parts of this episode?
Ooh. Before I can answer that, can we touch on like the concept of home for a bit?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So while I was watching this, it's interesting that like we're at the Western Air Temple, and the first thing that popped in my mind was, oh, like this is their sanctuary. Like this is definitely how I feel as a Buddhist. Like whenever I feel lost, like growing up, I didn't really go to the temple as much, but I think like that was my own personal journey. Like into high school, I had a lot of like Christian friends, and they would always bring me to their churches, and I think I converted to Christianity for a bit. But it wasn't until later that I think my grandma passed away, and she was really close to me. Like, I was really close to her, and my place of comfort was Buddhism. And so whenever, after she passed away, whenever I felt lost, like, even if it was, like, a very, like, culturally appropriated Buddha in, like, a very white store, like Hobby Lobby, you know, like, I still looked at that and felt comfort in it. And I don't know if that's the same with you guys and your religion, like, whenever you see, like, a... Can I ask what your guys' religions are?
Absolutely. I think spirituality and religion is something I struggle with. I grew up Southern Baptist, and that's there were a lot of ideologies that came out of that I learned that I didn't agree with. And so for me, I found I think kind of doing this podcast and looking at Avatar this way has almost felt like more of a sacred time to be able to look at characters and their experiences and the way that this is written and almost pull these life lessons out of that has kind of taken over that aspect of spirituality for me that sometimes I look for. And so that's been really nice. So I would say I'm more agnostic. I believe that there is a higher power, and I'm not really sure what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brene Brown is one of my fan. I'm a fan. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she is really great and has a couple TED Talks, really phenomenal. But she defines spirituality as it's grounded in something that connects us that is greater than all of us. And so in that, in and of itself, is grounded in love. And for me, that's kind of where I am. I wouldn't put myself under the umbrella of any religion. I am going to divinity school, which is somewhat ironic, but
might challenge you a little bit.
It's going to be challenging for me, but it's one of those things where, like, I'm going because I know that, and this might be relevant, is I know that religion has been traumatizing for a lot of people, and that especially Christianity and the narrative around LGBTQ plus IA, etc. People experience religion and trauma, and so for me, I'm going to learn more about the foundation of that so that I can respond to trauma. And that's kind of where I'm heading in terms of my spiritual journey. And so I also somewhat feel, rather than feeling a place of home for me around religion, I feel almost more unsafe when it comes to categorized religions.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with me. Why I bring it up is because it's interesting that this episode with the theme of forgiveness is at the Western Air Temple, and like the episode starts with them kind of like trekking through the desert, right? And it's like very symbolic, like, and then when they finally do reach the Western Air Temple, they can't even see it, like. And the only person that can see it is Toph, and it's not until she points it out that they can see it too. And the fact that it is like a Buddhist air temple, and the fact that Aang has so much ties to this, like the idea of home for Aang is his religion. It's like the airbending culture. It's these air temples. This is where he feels the safest. Same with Appa. If we explore like the other characters, like with Toph, like her safe place or her concept of home is earthbending. Like she feels the most secure when she can feel the earth, and she's like bonding with like badger moles, you know, like underground and away from her house. And then with Katara and Sokka, like it's the Southern Water Tribe and their family, and like anything related to waterbending. And with Haru, you can argue that his place of home or his idea of home is his family, and most importantly, his dad. Like in the beginning of the episode, he talks about how like his dad is back in jail, and you see him kind of like not sad, or he is sad, but he's kind of at peace, because I think he was able to find a different element of family in the gang and with like the Duke. And then even with the Duke, it's interesting to see him without Pipsqueak, like they're separated. But even with the Duke and with Teo, all of them aren't in like that broken down mentality that we first see them in, you know, or that we get a sense of when they are telling us about their lives in their own standalone episodes. And in the Western Air Temple, they're all together. And so the concept of home now becomes like with friends, like these friends are our family. And man, I love Teo so much. I think Teo is like a very overlooked character.
He's so positive. He's just a really positive character.
He just makes his way where he's at, too, and there's something super big to respect in Teo when you're able to kind of say, all right, I'm in this place, we're dealing with these things, and I'm going to make it feel like home, which I think is kind of what you're bringing up, is I'm gonna race down these pathways and go exploring, and we're going to make the best of it, which is, I think, a really cool thing for Teo.
Yeah,
and I think... Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and then it also ties into, like, in season 1, we see Aang, like, slowly forgive Teo and his dad, the inventor, for kind of, like, in his eyes, kind of, like, invading and disrespecting the Northern Air Temple with all of the machines that they built. And then Aang is even kind of insulted, in a sense, when he sees Teo like practicing in airbending or air gliding. And it's not until later, towards the end of that episode, where Aang like slowly forgives Teo and embraces him as part of like the family, and also like sharing this part of him that like up until that point he felt like he was the only airbender. And I think with that episode, with Teo kind of like embracing and embodying that airbending mentality and that freedom and that spirituality, like it's so beautiful. And then just seeing them all together in this episode, I freaking love it.
One of the things I find really intriguing about this concept of home is that the people who are most at home in the way that you described it are that's the order in which Zuko was forgiven. So Aang being most at home, being this is the Western Air Temple, this is like his home, and like then like Toph, right, who earthbending, where she is surrounded by earth and she is able to bend, and so she's able to forgive Zuko. And then the people like who are outside of their element, i.e. Katara and Sokka, are slowest to forgive. And I think that's an interesting concept. Like I find that to be a really neat thought process. What do you think about that, Sunshine?
Well, I think it goes back to earlier, like to be able to forgive, you have to feel safe, and I think it's easier to feel safe when you feel like you're home or you're in that secure place. And so to be able to do that makes you able to forgive. But I also think that it kind of speaks to Zuko, is that almost to be able to feel like he's home, to be in a place where to feel like he's home, he's got to let go of all these things that he regrets earlier. He's got to find that place of forgiveness for himself.
That's so beautiful.
If he even wants to step in the door and feel like he belongs, that's something that he's got to work on, is that forgiveness for himself. And I think to feel like you're at home, that has to happen.
That's fascinating, because so Brene Brown's book on Braving the Wilderness, which is all about belonging, it talks about how belonging to yourself is our ultimate goal. Where if we belong to ourselves, we can survive in the wilderness. And that's what we see where Zuko has arrived at this point. He so belongs to himself, like he knows that what he's doing is in the right. He's confident, and not confident in like engaging with the gang, but like confident that he is making the right choice. That he is like in the wilderness. It is scary. He is trying to survive all alone, and he is at a point where he can, like, it's just so beautiful that he is, because he so belongs to himself, he is able to confront the gang, and do so in a way that says, hey, I know I can help you. I want to change. Here I am. Zuko here.
Hi, Zuko here.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
So much. I so appreciate you lifting all that up because that sense of home is so important. And it's not something that everyone has, and so finding that can be difficult. But it's when it comes to being safe to be able to forgive, that's kind of an important part. It would seem.
Yeah. Oh,
We've got to jump into our devotion and our gratitude soon. But is there any other big things that we want to lift up from this episode before we jump into the back half of our episode today?
I haven't even talked about Zuko's concept of home yet. Can I do that?
Oh, please do. Yes.
With Zuko, in season 1, episode 2, Avatar Returns, like when he finally captures Aang, right? You hear in Dante Bosco's voice, like he's so happy. He's like, I'm going home. And you feel that pain and you feel like that longing for going back into the Fire Nation and being accepted, like in his eyes, finally being accepted into the family again. But of course, like that doesn't happen. Like a lot happens to Zuko. But even when he is like going down that rope and he's like looking at Avatar Yang Chen's statue, there's a flashback of him and Uncle Iroh at the Western Air Temple, I think like a week after he was banished. And that was when Zuko just lost his to him, his concept of home was shattered. It's gone. And it's so interesting now, like, it seems like right now, Zuko has figured out that his concept of home is Uncle Iroh. And him not having that for, like, the first half of season 3, like, wrecked him. And I think that's what made him, like, finally have this self-realization, like, of what he wanted. And so... And then it ties in at the end when he, like, it's so funny when Sokka, like, walks him to his room. It's so awkward. But when he's in that room, he pulls out a picture of Uncle Iroh and looks at it and smiles. And it's just so heartwarming for him to finally realize, like, he's found his home. He knows what he wants. He knows where his sense of security is. And it's not until like the season finale where he's finally reunited with Uncle Iroh. But I think it's just so interesting that he has that picture of Uncle Iroh and how that's precious to him. But it also makes me remember like what Katara mentioned earlier in the episode. Like, he stole my mother's necklace. And in defense of Katara and like, I don't know, just all of the crap the fandom is giving her about always talking about Katara, like her mother's necklace, like, replace that with Uncle Iroh and Uncle Iroh's picture of his son. If someone stole Uncle Iroh's picture of his son, that person is dead, right? Like, the whole fandom would riot. That's how...
That's so true. That's so true.
Yeah.
What a great comparison.
And, like...
Wow.
And it also doesn't, like... I think rewatching this show right now for me, and, like, I empathize with the Katara so much more because, like, a month ago, my cousin passed away from cancer, and she has a 4-year-old son, or a 5-year-old son. And I think that was how old Katara was when she lost her mom. And so, and this is why I am also forgiving Zuko at the same time with Katara. And that's why, like, right now, Katara, like, when she decides to forgive Zuko, he's done so much to hurt her. And, like, when he does take that necklace from her, like, ooh, I would murder him too. Like, oh man.
Yeah, which it kind of goes back to this idea that, like, Katara has no requirements to forgive Zuko in this moment, and the people who have been harmed in any situation are not responsible for forgiving the person who did them wrong. Period. right? And I think that's such an important thing to highlight. I also just want to just touch on how what you said about him having this moment with Iroh's picture. I think for me that's the moment where he is able to say, I'm able to forgive myself because I know I'm doing what one Uncle Iroh, my uncle, the person I love, knows to be right, and I know I'm in alignment with his values. And that is, again, going back to this belonging to yourself, and like I'm doing what I believe is right, and I am able to forgive myself for what I have done because I am making amends now.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's such a beautiful kind of stamp to be able to end this section on. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will come back with our devotion and our gratitude for the episode. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We just had a nice little break to talk about all of our things, and now we're coming back to our devotion. And this week, thankfully, we have Marilyn joining us. But this week, we're going to be talking about forgiveness through the element of earth. And so, Sunshine, when you think of forgiveness and earth and how they relate with one another, what is a goal that you want to set for yourself for the coming week, and with those two things in mind?
This is one of those weird moments because I don't hope that I have to apologize a lot for things. Like I'm not hoping for like a lot of moments where I need to apologize. They probably happen more frequently than I would want them to, but I think for me, I really love the way that you kind of ordered out and set the foundation, and how that foundation is really important for that apology to land.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think it's how am I setting that foundational piece? Am I doing the things to make amends? Am I doing all of that before the apology even starts? And so that's kind of my goal, is to make sure that in those moments where I need to apologize for something, have I done the work to lead up to that point so that the apology can be in the best place for it to be heard, and for it to really come from a place of I'm apologizing because it's what needs to happen. This is it, that it's not for me. It's not for me to feel the response of, oh, good, like they forgave me, so my conscience is clear. It's you are either going to forgive me or not forgive me, but that's not why I'm apologizing. I'm apologizing because I did something wrong.
That's beautiful.
And I think that's what I need to work on this week. Again, hoping that I don't have to make a lot of apologies.
Yeah.
But sometimes you do.
But it also just underlined the score that like earth is the foundation of everything.
Yeah.
And that's like we have to lay that foundation in order to be able to apologize. So I love that you laid that out for us. For me, I'm tying forgiveness to earth in the sense that I think if I go back to that quote where if we're unable to forgive someone, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Like I want forgiveness. I want forgiveness. And so I think forgiveness, because I think forgiveness is nourishing. I think it's life-giving. I think that the fact that the gang was able to forgive Zuko gave him the avenue to make further amends than he was able to prior. And so it's interesting. So for me, it's how do I nourish myself by thinking about the things that I am holding on to, the angers that I am holding on to, the resentments that I am holding on to, and how do I say, for me, how can I nourish myself by letting some of these things go? And how can I nourish myself and nourish everyone else by letting these things go? And so that's and letting them go does not like. And I think it's important that we highlight that forgiving someone is not letting them off the hook, right? It's not saying I'm not going to hold you accountable for your actions. It's saying I forgive you, and I'm going to hold you accountable for your actions.
Right.
And I think for me that's the nourishing piece. Is like if a 5-year-old does something wrong, it's saying, hey, I forgive you. This is something that like 5-year-olds do, and I'm going to put you in timeout for a few minutes. Right? And so I'm going to hold you accountable, and maybe that's not the best course of action, but like whatever it may be. And so for me, it's how do I forgive and balance that accountability?
Because you can still forgive and set boundaries. I can
Yes.
forgive you, and yet here's a boundary that I'm not willing to cross.
And we see Katara set that boundary,
and I
right?
need you to not do that. Or I'm not ready to open. I forgive you, but I'm not ready to pursue this relationship right
Exactly.
now. And
Yes.
sometimes those boundaries have to be set. But yeah, that's so tough.
I didn't say it was easy.
It's so tough. Marilyn, do you have anything that you would like to add for our devotion?
Yeah, it's interesting that you guys bring up like the concept of boundaries, and like even in this episode, Zuko is still learning these boundaries and learning how to respect them. Like when Toph's feet get burned and she's running away and she tells him to like back off, and he doesn't. Like he keeps pursuing her, and he like even like physically grabs her, and she had to physically push him away. And like with Zuko, he's like still learning boundaries, but that doesn't stop him. And I really like how he, even when he keeps, in his eyes, like he's so bad at being good, and he's still forgiving himself constantly. And even with the absence of Katara's forgiveness, he still keeps going. And I think I definitely need to be more like that in terms of like not always getting the forgiveness from people, or not always like, in terms of me moving on with my life, I don't need forgiveness from others to try to be a better person.
I love that you highlighted that moment with Zuko and Toph. I think that's just such an integral thing that we didn't really spend much time on. And I think that it is never okay for a man especially to use physical force to restrain a woman when they're trying to run away. Or, to put it another way, anyone in a position of power to physically restrain someone with less power when words are not enough.
Yeah.
Right? The only time where that might be accepted is when they're putting themselves at harm's way. And I think that it's just, I just want to lift that up, and I think that's important. So thank you for lifting that up for us.
Boundaries are important when it comes to forgiveness, because if I'm setting boundaries and you continue to cross them, you're not showing me that you're not making amends to make amends, right? And so that's an important thing to highlight when it does come to forgiveness.
Yeah.
That is so tough.
Wow. Oh, gratitude.
What an episode. Let's talk about gratitude. Let's give some gratitude out.
I love gratitude.
Marilyn, we'll let you start this time. Who are you grateful for this episode?
Oh my gosh. All right. So, I kind of have one and a half. My half is May Chan. She's a staff writer for this episode, and I think she came on for the Avatar show. I think it starts with the Puppet Master with the bloodbending episode, and then it ends with the season finale. And I think I just love, like, the older I get, the more I pay attention to people of color in, like, the industry, but also, like, women people of color, specifically an Asian American female writer. And it sucks because I was trying to look up and Google interviews with her in terms of, like, what she did on the show, how, like, what her part was, like, besides Aaron Ehatz and his wife, Elizabeth, like, what did she contribute to? And my headcanon, I don't know if this is real, but my headcanon is that, like, because everyone compares this show, right, to Game of Thrones. Like, Game of Thrones was a show where the ending did not satisfy anyone. And then there's just, like, a meme of, like, everyone pointing to Avatar, like, this is how it's done, you know? And so, I think...
The horse meme.
Yeah. And so I think, like, my headcanon is telling me that May Chan is the reason why, like, the landing stuck for this show. I think she, like, was a very integral part in making sure that this show, like, was on it. I could be wrong. I don't know. I would love to interview her. That's, like, my dream goal.
Well, representation matters.
Yeah.
I think you're lifting that up, and I think that's important. I love it.
And then, but my character from the show that I want to appreciate is Katara. Oh my gosh, I love Katara so much. And like going back to your episode with Cricket Lee and characters with resilience, like Katara is so secure and just like resilient in everything that she does, even if she is stubborn. Like you see that with like what is it, the painted lady. You see that with the waterbending scroll. Like I love women with conviction that knows their, like, that has an agenda and knows what they want and isn't fooling themselves. Like it could be so easy for Katara to go with the flow, right? To be like the waterbender, where she, like, as the gang is forgiving Zuko, she could have easily just like lied and went along with it, but she trusted Aang and his judgment without saying that she forgave Zuko, because that comes later. And even when she does approach him at the end, and she's totally justified for threatening him. Like, as bad as that is, in the show of violence, that's kind of her last resort, right? To be kind of like the mama bear. And she's always been the mama bear. She's always been the heart of the show and the mother figure for all of these kids, because they're still kids. And I just want to like show appreciation for her for being the mama bear and protecting them, even if it does resort to threatening Zuko with violence.
I think that's beautiful. I think she deserves all the gratitude. I'm all for it. I'm here for it, and I love it. And I'm a Katara stan. I love it. Sunshine, what's your gratitude moment?
I'm gonna go with Toph.
Ooh, I love her.
I so respect her ability to think logically and to be able to piece together Aang needs a firebending master.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we need to look at forgiving Zuko and see if this is because he's the best pet. I am so not that person.
Oh, me either.
And so her ability to do that, I am emotion filled, and I would have been right there with Sokka and Katara.
Same.
And so her ability to kind of sit there and call them out and say, hey, we need to think about this logically and at least give it the time of day to at least process this. We still might not decide that it's the right way, but can we at least process this?
And the quote is, maybe you're letting your hurt feelings keep you from seeing things clearly.
Right. And I again, that is so not me. She goes and she tries, and yes, there's a little kerfuffle, but I really appreciated that about her, and so I want to lift that up because that's such a thing that I don't do, and I love that she does that here.
Yeah.
What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for lifting that up. So I gotta pick Zuko. I just what a paradigm, like just, oh my goodness, paragon of excellence in regards to courage. This is what courage looks like. It looks like apologizing. It looks like making amends. It looks like doing the work to make things right when there has been a systemic issue in your culture, in your life, and you have started to see it plainly and clearly. And I want more people in our lives today to be like Zuko, to be able to see the things that he has done wrong, but also see the history of violence and oppression that his family has done, and to want to make it right. I want that so much for all of us, and I want there to be, I want to cultivate more brave cultures that look to Zuko for guidance. That's what I want.
Gratitude for Zuko, Katara, and Toph. What a wonderful way to end this episode. Marilyn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Where can everybody find all of your things?
You can find Beyond Bending on all those social medias, beyondbending.com. We're on iTunes, Spotify, I think anywhere. that plays podcasts. I think you can find us. Yeah, go ahead and check out my podcast.
Sweet.
Absolutely. Please do. Please go head over to Beyond Bending and give them a follow and subscribe and listen, because there's so much. We've got time to listen to podcasts, and who doesn't love more Avatar content?
That's right.
I do.
Another thing you can do is, remember, support us on Patreon. We're looking to get to Quora soon, and we really want to do that, and we have a goal of getting to 50 Patreon subscribers by then, and we really need your help and support to do that. We're getting there. We're closer, but we would love to have your support as we try to get to that goal.
Absolutely. Check us out on Instagram and Twitter at BNB_pod. Check us out on Facebook at Bending Not Breaking. And I'm Sunshine Mayfield.
And this has been Pruitt.
And this has been Bending Not Breaking. Thank you for listening.
Goodbye.
Okay, goodbye.
Woo.